it. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker for tonight, Negin Serafi. Negin has been leading projects, teams, organizations across Canada and the US for over a decade. From arts and culture to community building to educational institutions and tech companies, Negin's work spans across diverse industries and teams. Her entrepreneurial journey most recently led her to join Disco as the head of community, helping founders build, monetize, and scale global learning communities. In addition to her work at Disco, Negin continues consulting and speaking, working with organizations, entrepreneurs, cultural leaders on vision, strategy, impact, and growth. Navgeen, we're extremely lucky to have you here today, and I invite you to please begin the session.
Thank you so much, Alina, and a big thank you to Y-Space for inviting me and including me in this program. And hello to all of you. I'm going to start by saying that we're going to be really interacting with each other this session. This is not a passive experience. This is super connective. You want to be able to actually have conversations with one another. That's why we're here. If we were in a physical room together, that's what we would be doing. So I hope to bring as much of that as possible into this session. If it's available to you, I would encourage you to turn your camera on. You will be going into breakout rooms and connecting with one another. If you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. But again, just to create that sense of intimacy and connection, if you could turn your camera on starting now or for the rest of the session, that would be super helpful, I think, for everyone. So in terms of what we're going to do today, I'm going to go through some slides and, share as much as I can from my experience. And then we're going to do a bunch of breakouts. And then there'll be an opportunity at the very end to ask some questions about everything that you learned. But I hope that you use the chat today to actually really interact with one another and also to interact with me as well. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. I know Alina is going to be keeping an eye on the chat and Jacob as well. But if you have anything that comes up for you throughout, if you have any ideas or insights that you want to share, any questions, I invite you to do that there. And we're actually going to start right off the top with a breakout room. We're going to introduce ourselves. So Alina, I'm going to ask you or Jacob to put us in rooms of 4. And we're going to go in for about 5 minutes. And the questions that I want you to think about and answer is, you're going to introduce yourself and what does leadership mean to you? Now you can use some of your personal experiences or, anything that you've seen in the world, but what does leadership mean to you? So we're going to go into breakout rooms and then we're going to come back and we're going to dive into the content.
So can anybody confirm, did you receive an option to join?
I did.
All right, perfect.
Hello?
Hi, Lillian, were you not assigned to a breakout room?
Was I
think I am.
To a breakout.
Oh, all right. Is this also a breakout room? Wait, Lillian, sorry, I'm just going
I think,
to
yeah, I think
move.
so. I selected join.
All right, let me just move you to another room.
Hello, hello, welcome back. I think that may have worked for some folks and not for others, but we'll figure it out in the next round. For those of you who were able to connect with one another in the breakout rooms, I would love for you to share the question, the answer to your question in the chat, if you can. What does leadership mean to you? Would love to get the chat going. And if anyone does want to share and go off mute and share openly, you also have the opportunity to do that now. Okay, so while folks are deciding whether they want to, share things in the chat, I would love to deep dive into our presentation for today. So I asked you what leadership means to you, and I would love to share with you what leadership means to me. And these are, things that I have distilled over the past 15 years, really trying to understand how to demystify this thing that sometimes can feel so mystical and hard to understand, but it's actually not. So in terms of what leadership means to me, leadership is a verb. It's not a static, stagnant, or passive thing. It's active and it's participatory, and it really requires our intention and our attention. It's not something that I think we're born with. I actually think it's something that we can learn and something that we must invest in practicing. And, when it comes to leadership being a verb, it's also something that, we need to want to do. It's not something that, just naturally comes to us. Some people are better at leadership than others naturally, maybe because of the education they've had, or the family they grew up in, or the opportunities that they had growing up, or the roles that they played in their friends, in their community, in their families. But ultimately, we want to be able to say, this is something I want to get good at, and so I'm going to invest in it.
And again, there are a few comments in the chat also regarding leadership. So Jason is saying leadership is listening. And
yes.
then Chris, on behalf of Group 2, is saying leadership requires an understanding of objectives of the enterprise and, of course, getting everyone to pull in the same direction with empathy.
I couldn't agree more. Decision-making, communicating, absolutely. Thank you, and keep sharing. You know what, I can't look at all the screens at once, but Alina, thank you so much for bringing my attention to it.
And Rania is saying it's decision-making. Yes, we've covered that.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to share about leadership is an embodiment of our values. It's really hard to separate leadership from the values that we hold as leaders, and it's not neutral, right? Like when we have the opportunities to lead, we're creating impact in the world. And sometimes when we think about impact, I think we think of positive impact, but impact can be both positive and negative. And knowing our values and acting from our values allows us to be more in alignment and more intentional about the impact that we can create in the world. Leadership is an act of service. Sometimes when we imagine a leader, we kind of think of like a pedestal or a podium or a stage, But leadership is very relational. It's about building relationships and building trust. It's about generosity. What can I contribute? What can I give to this organization, this team, this group? It's inclusive. We have to ask ourselves, who gets to be at the table? Who gets to seat? Who am I designing for? Who gets to be included in the decision making? And it's responsive. If anything, what we've seen over the past couple of years with the pandemic is that what we need is leaders who can respond to both internal and external situations as they come up. And leadership is everyone's responsibility. It's really easy, especially in hierarchical structures, to think of leadership as something that's top down, but leadership is actually everyone's responsibility. It's not a dictatorship, even though sometimes in certain places and certain industries it can feel that way, but ultimately it's something that we all have to practice. And as leaders, one of our jobs is to create space for other leaders to step in and to grow and to have opportunities to lead. And so when people have the space and opportunity to lead, they are more likely to feel motivated to do their best work. Now, I'm going to turn my attention back to the chat from Janet. Leadership is being able to make the tough choices. 100% couldn't agree more. And Garisha, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Leadership is bringing your authentic and innate qualities and values and merging with others for a shared cause and mission. Shared purpose, super, super powerful. And leadership, of course, is leading people. The big leadership vision here is this. Leadership is the capacity to transform a vision into reality. It's wild what leaders are able to do, right? Entrepreneurs, creators, cultural leaders, imagining something that doesn't exist. And then over the course of time, prototyping, experimenting, working with teams, bringing that vision to life, designing and developing something that is then tangible and real and able to be experienced by other people. That is the capacity of every leader, whether you're, imagining an organization or a community or a city or a university or a product or a service. It doesn't matter. Oftentimes it's a seed of an idea that then grows into something beautiful and impactful. Which makes leaders world builders and change agents and future makers. Companies and organizations are truly microcosms of the worlds we want to create because they're not neutral, because they have an impact, because leaders are able to actually not just imagine, but create possible futures. And I want to make this distinction very, very clear right from the get-go. Entrepreneurship is not necessarily leadership. It's not a given. Entrepreneurs can create impact, and impact requires leadership. So you must learn as entrepreneurs to become great leaders as part of your responsibility so that you can be intentional about creating net positive impact in the world. So when you think about this world building exercise, think about some of these questions. What is your vision for this world? What are the values of this world? What is the operating system of this world? Who's included in decision-making? How do you make decisions? Who gets to have power? It's really hard to talk about leadership without talking about power and power dynamics. We could do a whole session on that, but we're going to focus today because that's a deep topic. I really love this quote by one of my favorite science fiction authors and thought leader, the late Octavia E. Butler. All struggles are essentially power struggles. Who will rule? Who will lead? Who will define, refine, confine, design? Who will dominate? All struggles are essentially power struggles, and most are no more intellectual than two rams knocking their heads together. So how do you want to lead your company? Like a community, a hierarchy, or a sandbox? These are the three that I find, used most often, but I'm sure there's lots of different models. I want to present these three to help you create a little bit of a framework and maybe reflect on what you're already doing and what you might want to be doing differently. So what exactly is a community model? In a community model, everyone is included in the planning and decision-making and the ideation and the conversations. And it's not like one person's voice really outweighs another. The collective makes the decision about how to move forward. Now, there's pros and cons to each of these. With the community model, things just tend to go a little bit slower, but then everyone tends to be a little bit more involved, which always leads to wonderful things. A hierarchy, this is the one we're most used to, especially in business and entrepreneurship, right? There's individuals at the top who have more power. They decide who gets to get included in the planning and decision making. And then oftentimes they also decide, either them or a smaller group of people, who make final calls. And then there's the sandbox, which is kind of like a hybrid of the hierarchy and the community model, which is everybody has an opportunity to contribute and really, have their voice included in the ideation and the decision making in a designed and confined and structured way. But then ultimately, those bigger ideas and conversations get taken to a different group of people who may make decisions. So everyone has a chance to contribute, but not everybody's included in the final decision making. So if you have a team, how do you currently lead your company? You can choose one of the examples we've already shared, or maybe, one that you have that wasn't represented. And if you plan on having a team in the future, how do you imagine leading your team or company? So I want us to go back into our breakout rooms. I think, Alina, there's an option to make sure that the two of us at least aren't included in the breakouts. And we'll do rooms of 4, and we'll go in for 5 minutes. And I would love for you to, join on camera if you can. Otherwise, just please go off mute and connect with one another in the rooms to answer your question, and then we'll come right back.
Sorry, Negin, just to clarify, you want breakout rooms, 4 people in one room?
Yeah, 4 people,
All
and
right.
we'll go in for 5 or 6 minutes.
All right, perfect. Got it. Okay, hopefully this works now. I think it worked. Okay, we'll have to put Grisha. Hi, Grisha, I'm going to assign you to another room.
Alina, I think we can bring folks back a little early.
Going forward, you want to do 4 minutes?
I'm just noticing that some folks aren't super engaged in the breakout, so maybe we keep everyone in the main session and just do the questions. It's hard for me to tell, right, if there's a lot of conversation or not. But let's see how the chat is when everyone comes back. Hi, folks, welcome back. For those of you who had a chance to share and connect, would love to hear from you on how you're currently running your organization or how you're imagining how you want to lead your organization. Feel free to share in the chat as we continue to move forward with the session. If anyone also wants to come off mute and share, that's also available to you.
I can share. One of the things I was saying in the room before is it depends on the type of people you're kind of working with. I personally do a hybrid depending on if I'm working with a team that's more senior or a team that requires more structure. So sometimes I can be hierarchical, and I know it gets a bad rap sometimes because it's one person making decisions, but it depends on the speed of the decision that needs to be made. That could be an appropriate way, but sometimes community, if you have a senior set of people that you trust and you want to listen to them, and that's why you potentially have them there as advisors, etc., you could utilize that. And same thing with the sandbox. So it depends on the situation and the people that you're with. You have to adjust your leadership style, in my personal opinion, at least.
Rania, that's a really great point. It's almost like it's not a one and done. It's a modular design for how you lead.
Exactly.
Malentino, I hope I'm saying this correctly. As a leader, you have to be firm, but also flexible when working with a team, depending on the requirements. So yes, absolutely similar to what Rania was sharing. I think there's different responsiveness to different things that come up for sure. If anyone else wants to share, please go ahead in the chat, but let's keep going because we've got lots to cover here tonight. So what are the attributes and tools of great leaders? I could certainly list many, I'm sure you could too, but I've distilled them down to these 8. And these are interchangeable. These are symbiotic, so they work with one another. You might need different things at different times, depending on the situation or the challenge that you're facing. And you'll notice there's a little question mark at the bottom. So we'll get to that later. Don't worry, I didn't forget to put one of the circles. But this is something that I think that needs to be revisited often. But these are the tools that can really help us move forward, especially in difficult times. So you notice that awareness was right in the middle, and I really see awareness as the operating system of leadership, and I've broken it down to 2 parts of awareness just for our understanding, one being the self-awareness and the other being social awareness. And the reason why I think, awareness is probably the most attribute of all great leaders is because it allows us to determine which other attributes and tools we need in any given moment. If we're not aware of ourselves, of the people we're working with, of the situation at hand, of the political and social challenges that we're facing, it would be really hard for us to tap into understand how we need to show up as a leader. And so awareness is something that I want to deep dive into first and foremost before we look at some of the other attributes. So what does this look like in practice? These words sometimes can feel a little bit fluffy, like courage and empathy and resilience, but these have very tangible outcomes on a daily basis as a leader, right? So when you're an entrepreneur, you're going to be faced with a lot of decision making, a lot of challenges, a lot of opportunities. And so these attributes and tools can help you in moving forward. And so when it comes to self-awareness, what that looks like in practice is being aware of your emotional state. So when you're, feeling angry or upset or exhausted or angry or tired or frustrated or nervous or scared, and then being aware of how your energy and your emotional state, and maybe even your unconscious behaviors, which, 70% of our communication is nonverbal. So that's your body language, of your facial expressions, how they're going to show up for you and how they might be impacting other people. Emotional regulation is a big, big part of self-awareness. It could also be taken out as its own separate thing, but I included it here. But in order for you to understand how to regulate your emotions, you need to be able to know what's coming up for you in the first place. If you don't recognize that you're frustrated, you might communicate that in a way that you might regret in the future, right? So in a high stress situation, which is inevitable, we're all going to face that. You want to be able to regulate your emotions by first understanding what you're actually feeling and then being super aware of your body language and your energy. And then being really, really mindful about listening actively when people are sharing and, really being mindful about how you both give and receive feedback. Again, with that nonverbal communication, we're actually always communicating with one another. So even when you're in a state of quiet and listening, people are probably likely going to be reading your body language, especially when they're sharing something that might be vulnerable for them. On the social awareness side, this looks like caring about and understanding and at least seeking to understand what the heck is going on socially and politically, and really, both learning and unlearning, and, having empathy for the inequity and injustice faced by so many underrepresented groups. What you want to do from a socially aware place within your organization as a leader is to create psychological safety for your team. So you can do that by acknowledging the reality and creating space for some of that uncomfortable dialogue. I'm Iranian, lots of things going on in Iran right now, and it would be really weird for my team to not mention anything about it. I had multiple people reach out to me. I had the CEO of our company, schedule a one-on-one with me to check in to make sure I'm okay. These are the things that make a really big difference in your leadership, both within your company and in the world. You want to create a structure where you're giving and receiving mutual feedback. Sometimes, again, in more hierarchical structures, the feedback can be one way, but we can all learn from one another. And so you want to be able to create that psychological safety by saying, this is how we both receive and give feedback. And then taking ownership of hurtful and harmful behavior. No one's perfect. Leaders are humans, and we're going to make mistakes. But when you do cause harm or cause hurt, it's really important to be able to say, this is what I did. I'm going to name it. I'm going to take ownership, and I want to make it right. And then, to that point, being in tune and aware of others' emotional states and responding appropriately. You may be coming in peace. You may be showing up as your best self, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you have no idea what other people walked into the room with, right? So being able to have empathy and being able to connect with the other person's situation is going to be really helpful, because we never really know at any given moment what someone might be going through. Speaking of empathy, what does empathy actually look like in practice, right? We all think we should have it. We all think we're a little bit empathetic. Some people think they're empaths. I don't know if that's a real thing, but it's really, really good to be sensitive to other people's needs, feelings, vulnerabilities, insecurities. So really in practice, this looks like listening to understand and asking empowering questions that are going to both lead you and others to a deeper understanding and to gaining more insights. You want to consider and create space for the unique lived experiences of the people that you're interacting with, whether it's your team members, your partners, your co-founders, your customers or your clients. And you want to create a culture of care where you're also designing safer spaces. We can never really create fully safe spaces because we don't really know what the safety needs of everyone are, but we can create safer spaces. You want to, think about building products and services with empathy. This is like the core of design thinking. It's really, addressing the needs, challenges, and goals of your customers. And you need empathy to be able to do that. And you need openness and curiosity to want to learn about them. And then, of course, being kind and forgiving and non-judgmental and non-violent. When I say non-violent, I'm not talking about physical violence. I'm talking about passive aggressiveness. I'm talking about microaggressions, just those things that you feel like they, you maybe don't even realize they're harmful, but they are. And of course, having the humility to admit mistakes and apologize. Clarity, another big word. So something that leaders do really well is envision possible futures, right? And, be able to see how we can get from one point to another. And in order to cut through the noise, you need to be able to distill a sea of ideas and possibilities into actionable next steps. Now, you got to be able to do this in the best of times and sometimes amid absolute chaos and uncertainty. This is part of leadership. You want to be able to then provide that clear direction to team members and, communicate what the expectations are and get aligned on what success looks like. If people don't know where they're going, why they're going there, what they need to get there, what's expected of them when they get there, what the outcome needs to be, it's going to be really hard for them to feel confident and courageous and motivated to move forward. You also need to implement feedback loops. Like clarity isn't something that just kind of comes to you when you're having dinner. Sometimes that does, stroke of insight, that's awesome. But most of the time it's generally coming from experience. It's coming from data. It's coming from the feedback loops that you've created within your organization, within your, team structure, to be able to understand what's working and what's not working. You want to be effective and you want to constantly improve and you want to get closer to success. And you do this by gaining more clarity, and you need to design for clarity going forward. Courage. This courage is a funny one because I think sometimes we can think that courage is an absence of fear. I absolutely do not think so. I think courage is the embracing of fear. Fear is actually a really great tool, especially in entrepreneurship. Sometimes it's that signal that says, hey, you're going the wrong way. You're spending too much money. This isn't, this might not work for you. This is super risky. So listening to that is really important. And then understanding when to take those leaps is going to require courage. For me, in a really tangible way, courage looks like confronting realities, especially the hard ones. So this could be the fact that maybe you're not consistently meeting your goals. Maybe your employee is unhappy and lacking in motivation. Maybe you don't have product market fit, or you're feeling burnt out, or you need help, or you're running out of money. These are realities that we could ignore or avoid if we are not feeling courageous. The next step is then to take ownership and responsibility for what has happened and also for what might happen. As a leader, that is just part of your role. You also want to create and encourage a brave culture, which sometimes means saying yes, sometimes means saying no, and being able to pivot whenever necessary. Foresight. This one, it's hard to pick favorites with these ones, but this one's definitely one of my favorites. Being able to, nobody can actually predict the future. No one knows what will happen for sure, but we can get good at predicting probabilities, right? So we do that by investing in research and discovery and doing lots of experimentation and learning from that experimentation and researching and understanding not just our industry, but different markets as well as cultural trends. The cultural zeitgeist is going to impact all of the work that we do and the businesses that we create. It's also going to impact our team members. So this is a really important one. You want to be able to track and measure all of the data that's coming in. And those are the things that are going to lead to pattern recognition and really powerful insights for you. So you don't want to just randomly throw things out in the world and hope that they'll work, right? Foresight requires you to understand what you're doing, and then what the impact of it is. Over time, that creates this amazing muscle for you to be able to understand that, the last 10 times we did this, this is what happened. So I think this is probable in our next step, right? It is a muscle. It's not just something that you get good at overnight. And so foresight is ultimately a tool to help you mitigate the future because you now have a clearer picture of what's possible and what's probable. And then you also understand the potential consequences of your decisions. So then it makes it a little bit easier for you to be able to make decisions and to move forward. Focus. Okay, I will say this one is critical. Without this one, I have seen businesses fail because they're trying to do too much at once. Leaders who are taking on so much that they actually can't give their business and their team the attention and intention that it deserves. So you want to get really, really clear on your annual and quarterly goals, or OKRs if you're using them. That's objective and key results. There's a really good book called Radical Focus, which I would recommend. There's also some really great articles if you don't want to read a full book. And so you want to be able to not just identify your goals and key results, you also want to understand the capacity and the resources required for every initiative and task. If you don't know what the capacity of your team is, if you don't know what the resources that you need are, it's going to be really hard, A, to deliver, and B, to be able to focus on the right things. You also want to be able to do a couple of things really well. You want to do less, but with more intention. And if you can determine the impact and effort of every growth or of every initiative, you'll be able to understand what's going to lead to growth. Time is a limited resource. So, as a leader, sometimes it's hard not to get distracted by shiny objects. On a personal level, it could be someone asking you to, show up to join a podcast or an interview or to an event. From a business perspective, there's just so many different things you could do or build or design. You need to be able to understand how much time and capacity something takes so you can say no to things and get really, really clear so that you don't get distracted by everything that comes your way. And then, of course, with that is prioritization. So what is a must-have and what is a nice-to-have? And again, learning to say no or not right now, which, we already said takes a lot of courage, but that is what it's going to allow you to focus. And focus, I would say, is possibly the number one most important thing for leaders who want to achieve success. Resilience. I feel like I don't have to go too deep into this one. We've all in different ways had to be resilient in our lives and in our businesses. But I think the most important thing here is things will fall apart. Things will go not according to plan. So that you need to ensure you have the support systems, the mentors, the resources, the protocols to navigate challenging times before they actually happen, right? It's hard to also be resilient when you're not taking care of yourself or your team has overextended themselves. You feel burnt out, you're not in good health. So being resilient also means I am taking care of me and I'm enabling and creating space for my team members to take care of themselves so that when the inevitable challenge or adversity comes our way, we can actually have the capacity to be resilient. We're not going to just fall apart. Agility. Now, I don't know if folks were starting their businesses during the pandemic or afterwards or at what point, but we all saw what happened to so many different industries. And there are going to be both internal and external circumstances that are going to test you as a leader and test your organization and test your team members. And, agility requires you to be able to adapt to those changes and to respond to those changes in the most efficient, least damaging way possible, right? And so you want to think about what you want to focus on strategically and what's really going to move the dial. If something isn't working, you want to be able to quickly pivot, whether it's in good times or bad times. You want to be able to say, this is not working for us. We're going to go in this direction, and be able to do that over and over and over again to get to where you need to go. You also need to build company-wide systems and different processes so that you can make communication, collaboration easier and, be able to achieve success as a team, right? You also, with that, need the right set of tools to be able to not just track, but manage those goals, right? So people being on the same platform, there's so many of them that you could use. And if you don't want to use something that's already out there, you want to keep it simple, just a simple spreadsheet, even just to keep track of everything, is going to help you be a more agile leader. And of course, reflecting and learning without losing momentum. So sometimes when we take the time to reflect and learn from the things we've done that both worked or didn't work, it can be easy to then lose the rhythm and momentum that we had going into the projects and the initiatives that we thought were going to take off. So you want to be able to create a culture where you can stop and, pause for a moment and look back and take the learnings and continue moving forward. So back to this, right? This is the overview. These are, like I said, all interconnected. There's going to be situations where you need, one or two or three. Sometimes you need all of them all at the same time. And that question mark at the bottom is for you. It's for all of us to kind of be able to interchange the qualities that we need. This isn't like a fixed thing, right? Sometimes you need more attributes and tools. Sometimes you need different ones. Sometimes that little question mark is actually another human being that needs to come in and help you, and you don't have to be the person that solves the problems, right? So maybe we'll do a quick breakout, and I would love for you to answer this question in the breakout rooms. Who is the leader, alive or passed on, that you look up to, and what makes them a great leader? So let's go back into our rooms, maybe for about 3 to 4 minutes, and then we'll come back here and continue. Okay, folks, welcome back. Feel free to share any specific leaders and the attributes that you admire about them in the chat. If anyone also wants the opportunity to speak, feel free to go on off mute and would love to hear from you. Okay, let's keep going unless folks want to take the opportunity to share. I'll keep an eye on the chat. Systems, planning, and decision-making. I could do an entire session completely dedicated to this, but we'll touch on it a little bit tonight. And, you know, folks can also always reach out to me afterwards if you have any questions. But I am a huge systems thinking geek, and I think that it is literally a life skill. So I would highly recommend reading about it, learning about it, and applying it wherever you can. Systems are all around us. We ourselves are systems. Our bodies are systems. Our communities are systems. A forest is a system. The planet is a system. A university, a company, the entire universe, it's all a system. It's interdependent and it works together to achieve a specific purpose. So a business is a system. A system is an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. So what exactly is a system? So I wanted to break it down for you. The system is made up of 3 parts. So there's elements, which are kind of the tangible, visible parts that make up a system. So if you think about a tree, that's, you know, the roots, the trunk, the branches, the leaves. In a university, the elements are the teachers, the students, the classrooms, the books. And then we have interconnections. Interconnections are the relationships that hold the system together. So the relationships between the elements. And these can be physical interconnections or informational interconnections. So a physical interconnection is the water that flows from, you know, the roots through the branches to the leaves in a tree. An informational one is in a forest. I don't know if anyone has read The Secret Life of Trees. It's an amazing book. But essentially, when a tree in a forest is sick or dying, the other tree, you know, it sends a signal through the mycelium network, which is underground, to the other trees, and then the other trees are able to then give that sick tree nutrients. So the signal is an information that is, you know, working with the trees through the interconnections. And then, of course, there is the function and purpose or purpose. A system's purpose or function isn't necessarily what's stated. You, of course, have a, you know, purpose statement for your business or you have a mission, but ultimately purpose is deduced from behavior. This is a big one because we often feel that, you know, what we say we're doing is our purpose and our mission, but ultimately it's the things that we do daily in our business that actually make up the purpose of what that system actually is. So, you know, when you think about why things break or why things are weak, oftentimes it's a systems problem, both on kind of a societal, political level, but also, you know, when you think about our bodies or when you think about organizations, right? So in a system, you can change elements. So think about, like, you know, a football team, for example, you can change the players, but the system doesn't break. If you were to all of a sudden say that we, instead of, you know, we change the rules of the game, instead of using our hands for North American football, we're going to use our feet, you're now playing a completely different game. So you've completely changed the rules of engagement, therefore transform the interconnections, therefore the system is either going to change drastically or it's going to break. And then the same thing with the purpose or the function, right? If you say all of a sudden the purpose of this game is not to win, but it's to lose, you have a completely different system or one that's broken. So you need to be able to apply some of these systems thinking into your organization and understand where you're strong and where you might be a little bit weaker. A lot of times I find, especially in younger companies, it's the interconnections that need help. And when you have processes and structures that you set in place for how you make decisions and are clear about your goals, those interconnections between the different elements of your business tend to strengthen. So like I said, this is something we could super deep dive into, but we've got lots of things to cover. And I don't want to get too off course outside of leadership. But why systems thinking is important in leadership is because everything is a system. And if we want to be able to effectively lead or change a system, we need to first understand how it works. Let's talk about planning. This is a quote from my mentor, who I also got to work with for a few months at Disco, and it was an absolutely amazing experience. And he's Elliot Gatineau, who's the former head of education at OnDeck. And he says, if you don't have a plan, everything you do looks like a success and everything you do looks like a failure, depending on where you're at. Come up with a growth plan, do the market research, and hold yourself accountable to that plan. I couldn't agree more. And with planning, comes decision making, right? So oftentimes we're privileged enough to be able to be presented with multiple opportunities and possibilities. And sometimes that's at the same time. And we just can't do everything well, right? We also, even if we could, we might not have the resources. So that's the human power or the time or the energy or the money to be able to do it. So we need to learn how to organize and prioritize the choices that we have. And we also need to determine the impact and effort, and then also use our intuition and experiences and our own judgment and any data or insights that we have in order to choose the best path forward. And now this isn't just for you or your team or your company, which includes shareholders, customers, clients, or societies, but also the world at large, right? Like we said earlier, everything we do and don't do has an impact. So we need to be super conscious about what our impact is. And to that point, because we just learned about systems design, we understand that choices fuel behaviors, and behaviors over time determine what our purpose is. So we need to be very mindful about the behaviors and the choices that we have in our business. What does this look like in practice? How do we tangibly do this? So here are some questions to consider when you're, planning and decision making. Who does this benefit? Who does this impact? Who does this harm? What is the effort? So that's time, energy, or resources required to action this. What key results is this going to help us achieve? What are we saying no to if we say yes to this? Sometimes we forget when we say yes to one thing, we're saying no to another. What is the cost of doing this? What is the cost of not doing this? Can we afford to do this or not do this? And afford, again, is from a full resource perspective. These are some questions. There are many more, but it's a really good start when you're faced with big or challenging or difficult decisions, to ask yourself a set of questions. And it's also really helpful to have someone that you can process this with. The other really important thing is knowing your capacity as a leader and protecting your energy. So because we know it takes real resources to bring things to life and build successful things, we need to understand what our personal capacity is and what we can truly give our team and the initiatives that we're taking on, because they deserve our full attention and intention. And that's what's necessary for things to grow. And so sometimes I find that, and I do this too, right? It's really hard not to do this. We overextend ourselves in the short term. And so sometimes that has short-term benefits, but that doesn't work in the long term. It's not sustainable. And it also creates over time can create a toxic culture where people feel like they're expected to overextend themselves, especially if other, some team members are doing that while others are not. So it's really important to as the leader, set the culture for what taking care of yourself looks like and understanding your capacity looks like. And, the way to avoid burnout, which happens to a lot of people, and I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but you don't always realize you're burning out when you're burning out. You realize it after it's already happened. So you want to ensure that you're not depleting your resources. And you do that by planning and having foresight and being really focused on what's going to help you achieve your goals. Okay, folks, we're almost there. Fostering a culture of belonging. We couldn't talk about leadership without talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm not talking about a statement on the website. I'm talking what does this really look like in practice? So EDI is not something you get to choose to participate in. At this point in the world, especially if you have access to being a founder and being in a leadership position, EDI is your responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility, but especially folks who have the access and privilege to leadership and entrepreneurship. And it doesn't matter which industry you're in. It is not a statement that you put on your website or a donation you make to a charity once a year. It's really easy to check off the EDI box and say, we did it. But it shows up in your hiring practices, in your decision-making models, in how equitable your compensation is, and how you engage community, your community being your team and your community being the people that are impacted by the things that you're building. EDI is not stock photos you use in your marketing materials. It's really, really easy just to grab a bunch of pictures and then not actually do the work to ensure that you have a, inclusive, diverse, and equitable organization that's prioritizing EDI. So you want to have, diversity on your team. You want to elevate be very mindful about the individuals and groups that you're elevating on your platforms. And then, EDI shows up in the opportunities and how you distribute them, nepotism, favoritism, things like that show up. So it's so unconscious sometimes. And there's, we all carry unconscious biases, but knowing that we do can allow us to then show up as better leaders, because we can at least be aware that we do have the unconscious biases and ask ourselves, what can I do better or differently? So it's a practice that needs to be implemented, prioritized, and practiced by everyone in your organization across the board. I just see it as a horizontal line that runs through the organization, and it's absolutely foundational. And it's not, just a couple of people's responsibility to do that type of mental, emotional, physical, spiritual labor. Okay, so what do people need outside of feeling a sense of belonging because you're actually showing them that EDI matters to you? According to Malcolm Gladwell, 3 things: autonomy, complexity, and a connection between effort and reward are, most people will agree, the 3 qualities at work that work has to have if it is to be satisfying. And we all want to be working with teams who are engaged and, satisfied and motivated and, showing up as their best selves. So how do you motivate your team to do their best work? You want to prioritize transparency as much as possible. When people know what's going on, they feel a bigger sense of safety. And they're able to also then feel that they can be transparent as well with their thoughts, ideas, feelings. So when you prioritize transparency, you create a culture where others feel they can do the same. Creating space for ideas. Everybody wants to be involved in visioning and strategizing, and everybody has great ideas and a ton of different types of expertise and experiences that could be super helpful and foundational to whatever you're trying to build. And so don't be afraid to be inclusive of those ideas and to create space for blue sky thinking. That doesn't mean that you have to act on them. It just means that you create space for them so that you can create something quite amazing. And I think we do that when we go really, really big and visionary, and then are able to distill some of those ideas into smaller, more actionable things. You want to be able to provide direction and autonomy. So sometimes you can provide direction, very clear direction. Sometimes you need to create space. It's really hard for people to feel motivated and to do their best work when they don't have direction or autonomy, which actually does happen quite often when leaders aren't aware or careful about how they're approaching relationships and whether they're actually creating space for people's brilliance to shine through. You want to design for flow. I don't know if anyone's read the book Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who has a very long last name, but I finally learned how to pronounce it. It's a wonderful book, but just to distill it for you, flow is this experience of being deeply engaged in the task at hand, where everything else kind of disappears, worries, thoughts, and you experience deep presence and a lot of gratitude for what you're doing. And the way to flow, kind of one of the big pillars is that the task at hand is both challenging, but also meets your ability level. So you want to be able to task people with initiatives or create space for them to take on initiatives that they feel are both challenging, but that they are able to actually deliver on. And that's where they're going to be able to at least experience some level of flow. The other part of flow, especially in such a busy world with all of these notifications and meetings, is you actually need to create space in the schedule, in the week, for people to have the space to do deep work, right? If you're constantly checking Slack and if you're constantly being asked to, switch context from one thing to another, you're likely not going to be in a state of flow. And we do some of our best work when we're in flow. As I mentioned in my previous slide, actually practicing EDI. When people feel a sense of belonging, they feel like they can bring their whole selves. And when there's space for them to, speak up about things that is working and things that are not working, it just creates, again, a culture of care, and it does motivate people to do their best work. You want to cultivate growth. So you want to create space for people to learn, and learning requires, failing or making mistakes. And obviously that's within reason. There's going to be some catastrophic ones or things where people just weren't maybe paying attention, and there can be patterns of behavior, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about more so do we have a culture in this organization where we get to try things and we get to, think about them and reflect on them and then see if it worked or it didn't, why or why not, and learn and grow and move on, fostering a collaborative culture. I think that there is some level of competition that's required externally with maybe, other people in the same market as you. I'd like to think there's a little bit of abundance everywhere, but I understand why we need to be competitive as leaders and entrepreneurs. However, I don't actually think competition within an organization is healthy. There shouldn't be experiences where people feel like they have to, one-up each other or to fight for opportunities. In a collaborative culture, everyone is able to be in their zone of genius while, connecting with their peers and creating things with their peers that are, impactful and will move the dial. And last but not least, celebrate wins, small wins, big wins, all the things, because, people it's like creating things is kind of like a little game, right? We all have that inner child that needs to be acknowledged and celebrated. And, celebrating people makes them feel seen, but it also motivates them to continue building and growing. And I just think it's such a great way to also, as a leader, be able to measure how much you and your team have accomplished over the course of a quarter or a year or 5 years, however long you're in business. So I will leave you with that. I know there's some, a time for Q&A, but I would say the official presentation is over. I do have one final question, which I would be happy to chat about as a group. What is one thing you could change in the way that you approach leadership that could greatly impact the success of your business and team based on what you learned today? So this is the question we can answer. And then, of course, I'm here to answer any of your questions. I want to thank you again for being here. For those of you who participated in the breakout rooms and in the conversations, you can reach out to me via email. I'm happy to answer more of your questions. And then I guess we can move on to the Q&A, and I'll pass it over to Alina.
Great. Thank you so much, Negin. So anybody who wants to answer the last question that Negin posted? Oh, this is a great one, Negin, because I was writing down all the books that you were mentioning, and Amy's also saying, what books do you recommend?
Oh my gosh. Oh gosh. Here we go. How do I distill this? From a self-awareness perspective, I love Letting Go by David Hawkins, who's a psychologist and a spiritual teacher, and just really breaks down our connection to feelings and what they mean and how we can navigate them. I think that any and all of Bell Hooks's work is critical for leaders from all different backgrounds and industries. I love Radical Focus. I forget the name of the author. I think it's Christine, but I can look it up. Radical Focus is a great one for planning. This one actually, which I read often, Thinking in Systems by Donella H. Meadows is a great one. Oh my gosh, what other books? Paradox of Choice. I read that a long time ago, but really helped with understanding how people make decisions. and helped me with making decisions, but also thinking about how customers and clients will make decisions for the things that we're trying to sell to them. Braiding sweetgrass, really great one for understanding our connection to nature. Sacred instructions, another one around how we build futures. I can send you a whole list. Someone asked if I can send a list. Yes, I will make a list of my top books. I'm a huge book nerd.
That would be amazing. That would be such a great resource to have. Yes, so lots of requests for your book recommendations. That's wonderful. Okay, any questions regarding the session itself, about leadership, team building? I know in the previous session, a lot of founders would often ask, and I see this when I'm talking to a lot of founders, that especially during the early stage, they have to switch themselves between different roles. And if you could just speak on that a little, because the initial stages when you're just working alone can be a bit, not a bit, but really challenging. So how do you manage that when you are the entire team?
Mm-hmm. Amazing question. I built my first business by myself, and I know exactly, you're like, you are the operator, you are, the marketer, you are the partnerships director, you are everything. I would say, having worked by myself and then having worked with teams of various sizes, it actually, like, I almost wish I knew what I know now when I was working by myself, which is that you kind of have to approach it in the same way. You have to ask yourself the same questions. And really the biggest thing that what it comes down to is your capacity, right? So when you still need to set OKRs, you still need to think about the different strategies across different departments, even though you are the different departments. But ultimately, when it comes to understanding your capacity, it's much, 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 much less, right? So either you're outsourcing to like agencies or freelancers or consultants, but if you're doing everything yourself, then when you're making decisions about how much can I take on this quarter or this year, that's going to be top of mind, right? So how much can I actually take on based on the time and energy that I have as one person? And then when you think about like the impact and effort scores that you're going to create for those initiatives or the possible initiatives, really, really getting super meticulous about that, because the cost of doing the initiative that doesn't lead to results as an individual team member, as one person, is much higher, because it just sets you back a little bit. And you might not be able to afford it in the same way that when you have a team.
Got it. Beautifully explained. All right. Seems like the audience is really mulling over all the information. There's tons to think about. Some great insights there, and again. So while we're thinking of more questions, and please, guys, feel free to unmute yourself, ask away. This is your chance. Negin is such a wonderful resource, so this is where your chance to get all the information out of her. I had another question. Oh my God, I've completely blanked out. Yes, as a leader, sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations. How to approach difficult situations, particularly if you're giving feedback, or not wanting to have such a conversation. What's your take on that?
Oh gosh, difficult conversations. If you can have them in person, I would recommend having them in person. It just dehumanizes it even more when it has to be on Zoom. I actually prefer, truly, this might be a little strange, but I prefer phone calls for difficult conversations over Zoom. Because at least you have the space, to sometimes it's easier to feel people's energy when you're not like seeing them and making assumptions about what's going on with them, because we can't, it's a different experience when you're together, right? So I would say that I would say like create a container for the conversation right from the beginning, and that should be co-created, right? If you're having a difficult conversation, most likely it's going to be difficult for you, and it's going to be difficult for the other person or the other people that are involved. So just name it. Just name that it's going to potentially be, and I like to call them courageous conversations, coined by one of my co-founders, Adil Dalla, who's the executive director of Reset. But I think it's important to say, this is a courageous conversation. What do you need to feel a sense of safety in this conversation? This is what I need, it's like, I think it really comes down to that awareness and empathy piece that we were talking about earlier. And also I think maybe having some intentions from the beginning, right? Like everybody having the chance to name what their intentions are, especially if it's like a group conversation. Sometimes the one-on-one also, you can have intentions. Sometimes the intentions are clear because you've had to email about it beforehand and set those intentions beforehand. But that would be my recommendation.
Amazing. All right, Grisha has a question. Do you have any recommendations for building our speaking skills, especially in terms of imposter syndrome?
Amazing question, Grisha. I'm a kind of a weirdo. Like, I love imposter syndrome. Like, I think imposter syndrome is actually, like, I call it spirit. Maybe it's your soul, or maybe it's like your higher self, or whatever you want to call it. It's like, oh, you're about to grow. You're about to, step into like a more expansive space. And instead of like feeling kind of shy about it or feeling nervous about it, it's like, just embrace it. Like it actually could be something really, really incredible, and often is. In terms of building your speaking skills, the more you speak, the easier it becomes. And I will say this, whenever I'm extremely nervous about a talk or a facilitation, it's because I have not rehearsed or prepared, right? So I think that if you're speaking, you need to get really organized about what your ideas are and get your slides or whatever it is ready. And then you need to rehearse. You need to rehearse until you feel like you could just speak about it casually, Some people also will hire like speaking coaches. But another really great hack, and I used to be the co-chair of TEDx Toronto, so I worked a lot with different speakers and speaker coaches. Another really great hack is watching really great talks or listening to really great talks and trying to work backwards. Like, what was it about that speaker that was so engaging or captivating? Or, what was about the way they told a story that, really moved you? What did they use? What like practical, tangible things did they use when they were speaking? Were they speaking with their hands? Like me, I'm like the worst. I'm like just flinging my arms around. But, where were their hands? What was their facial expression? How did they use their bodies? How did they use the different intonations in their voice to be a better speaker? And then this one is like my little secret sauce trick, and I'm just going to give it to all of you, and you do with it what you will. Take voice lessons, even if you're not a singer or never ever plan to be, because what it does is that it's really uncomfortable, especially if you're not a great singer, to sing. So it kind of opens up your like throat chakras a little bit and allows you to feel a bit more comfortable and confident in even hearing your own voice. And one of the big things that I learned when I was taking voice lessons was that I actually learned to speak a little bit lower than my natural voice. And my voice mentor teacher shared with me that a lot of women will often lower their voices unconsciously because they've had to share space, with men. And so the voice is a little bit lower, even though it's not your natural voice. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I cannot believe that. And what happens when you lower your voice is that you exert a lot more energy. So these are things you can only learn in practice. And so voice lessons is my secret trick.
That's such an interesting tip, Negin. Thank you for sharing that. Yu Chen is asking, what is the feeling after overcoming the fear? And I'm guessing that's in relation to speaking skills, I believe. Yu Chen, if you could just elaborate a little, that'd be great.
And Natasha, I can, if you email me, I can send you my voice teacher. She teaches over Zoom. Maybe while Yu Chen is clarifying, Nafis had a question.
So he's actually recommending a book on courage.
Oh, okay.
Dare to Lead.
Dare to Lead. Oh, Brene. We love Brene. Brene's so great. All of Brene books. I think I can try to answer the fear one just around speaking is like, actually, I was just talking to my partner about this. When you're speaking live, you kind of jumping off, you're going down the mountain, there's no stopping, you know, it's pretty exhilarating. And I think it's the same way that when you're ready to kind of go down the mountain, when you're skiing or snowboarding, you got to get to the bottom of the mountain. And so once you get your footing and once you ground, the fear dissipates, partly because you don't have a choice, and also because the more you do it, the more you can trust yourself with it.
Absolutely. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So like I said earlier and again, I think people are just thinking over all the great tips and tricks that you've shared with them. You will be sharing the slides with them?
Yep, absolutely.
Perfect. Perfect. And so if folks do have questions, oh, we actually do. So Earl is asking, have you done a TED Talk on this or any other topics?
I have not done a TED Talk. I was for years on the behind the stage of TED, but not on the stage. But I do talk about leadership quite often, mostly universities, but always open to talk about it in different settings. Oh, thank you, Garisha. When I lower my voice, that's an interesting question. You know, I never even realized I lowered my voice until I did the voice lessons. I don't think any of us are taken more seriously based on our voice. I think we're taken seriously when we take ourselves seriously. So I don't think it has anything to do with that. But I do know that once I learned that I was doing that, I then had to look at all the reasons why and do a lot of unlearning, which then allowed me to be more confident and show up more confidently into especially like men-dominated spaces.
Interesting. And Nafis has a question. Any thoughts on how you can set proper stretch goals for your team members as a leader?
Well, my first response is I would set them with your team as a leader, as opposed to for your team. So definitely set them together. And in terms of like, this is a really interesting part, right? Where it's like stretch goals, like it's like you want it to be challenging enough that people are feeling kind of that we're expanding what we think we can do, and not so much so that you fall very, very short. So I would say it's a little bit of trial and error with your team in the beginning. I don't think it's like we're going to get this right from the get-go. But some of the things that I shared and some of the things that I recommended practicing are actually going to get you closer and closer to being able to set successful stretch goals, right? So maybe one thing you could do like more tangibly is to say, what would be like the wildest, like what is like really far and feels like, you know, way beyond kind of the moon even? What does Mars look like, right? And then kind of bring it down and say, what doesn't excite us? Like what doesn't feel good? And kind of figure out where that little sweet spot is, where you're like, this is far enough and it's a little bit scary.
That's interesting. I have another question for you, Negin. So most entrepreneurs are actually, they partner with co-founders. If you could just elaborate how co-working works. I know we've spoken a lot of leadership and, you know, as a leader handling your team, but when you're having to share the same responsibilities on the same space and the same level, what are your main, thoughts regarding that and how to handle that?
Are you speaking like kind of on a day-to-day basis or is it like when you're facing like in conflict or challenges?
Both, I believe, both.
My first recommendation would be to choose your co-founders very, very, very thoughtfully. You are most likely going to be spending more time with these folks than your partners, potentially your family, your friends. It is in every way a marriage. And so you want to quote unquote date before you dive in. Sometimes you get along really, really well with folks, but it just doesn't work from a business perspective. I think you need to get really aligned right from the get-go on how you work, what your expectations are, when you work. Some people are like, I don't want to work on Fridays. Okay, great. So maybe that's not going to work for you, and also thinking about what are the containers that we need to create for collaboration and co-working or co-creating, right? So it's like, how do we want to approach making decisions? What do we do if we're at odds? We're in completely different, zones and we need to get on the same page. How do you feel about money? Do you like making money? Sometimes it's like, some people have their own, actually, we all have our stuff with money. Everybody should talk about money, whether it's like friends, partners, business partners, right? So, talking about that ahead of time. What do we do if, we're running out of money? I would pose some scenarios. And then when you're actually working together, just being really respectful of each other's differences, different lived experiences, different approaches. I think when you sometimes like cross that threshold of respect, it's really hard to come back from that. And it's so easy to cross it sometimes, especially in high stress or, difficult situations. And then when you have conflict, sometimes it's good to have another person in the room who helps you navigate some of that conflict and challenges. You don't have to do it all alone. You're so in it and you're so emotionally involved on an individual level, but also co-founders are, very passionate about the things that they're building. So sometimes that passion can have unintended, consequences.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And Eugene wants to know, are you talking at a lower voice right now, or is this your normal range?
This is my normal voice. Yeah, I feel like, especially when I'm speaking, I feel it's different when you're running a meeting. I think in meetings sometimes I have to really catch myself, but this is definitely my normal voice.
Great. So folks, do you have any more questions? I will be sending over Nagin's presentation and her contact information. So if you have any questions, or if you think of any, if you have any afterthoughts, something that you'd like to share with her, please reach out to her. And I don't think we have any more questions in the chat as well. So we can wrap up. Nagin, thank you so much. This was amazing. Right from the get-go, I really, really enjoyed. Thank you so much for sharing all your insights, your knowledge, all the wonderful book recommendations. I have a list with me now, and I'm sure so does everybody who attended the session. So thank you so much. On behalf of Markham Small Business Center and WiseSpace, I really, really appreciate all the time and effort you made for this session. So thank you. And to all the attendees, thank you so much for joining in today. Thank you for your engagement, all the interesting conversations, your questions. I hope to see you all next week for our final session on diversity in the workplace, which Nagin also touched upon. So it'll be like a perfect segue to our next session. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us today. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Nafis. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.